Bem-vindos a mais uma edição de Blizz Blizz, o seu programa de debates de World of Warcraft. E galera, hoje um vídeo super especial para vocês, porque hoje eu tive a oportunidade, na verdade foi ontem, a oportunidade de conversar com um desenvolvedor de World of Warcraft, o Morgan Day. E eu pude perguntar para ele muitas coisas sobre Dragonflight, Brasas de Neltharion e também sobre o futuro de World of Warcraft. Hoje vamos ficar sabendo, afinal de contas, quem foi que atacou primeiro nessa guerra entre os primevistas e os dragões aspectos, o que a Blizzard pensa sobre raids menores, afixos positivos, hardcore clássico e também housing no World of Warcraft. Então se prepara que tem muita coisa no vídeo de hoje. Só lembrando que essa entrevista vai ser em inglês, obviamente, mas você pode ativar a tradução automática aqui embaixo, que vai aparecer a legenda em português para vocês. Aqui embaixo tem aquele quadradinho, você ativa, aí você vai lá nas configurações e escolhe qual a língua que você quer. É só colocar em português que vai funcionar, tá bom? Então aproveita para ver essa entrevista totalmente em português, mesmo que você não saiba inglês. If you are watching this video because you want to know more information about World of Warcraft, but you are not a viewer of the channel, you are not Brazilian, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoy, and sorry for my accents, and sometimes I became a little anxious to make these questions at the interview, but I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much, and leave the like below. Thank you guys. I'm a content creator here in Brazil for 14 years, I think, and I'm here to ask some questions about the game. Could we start?
Yeah, I'm totally ready. Do you want me to introduce myself or?
Okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Morgan Day. I am one of the associate game directors on World of Warcraft. And for Dragonflight, a lot of my focus was on things like combat, encounters, dungeons and raids, systems, rewards, other stuff like that.
Okay. My first question is about the lore, because that's something that people from my channel, they always make this question when I'm making some live streams or a video. It's about the motivation of the incarnates, of the evil dragons, because we know we are fighting them, they are the evil, but why they are the evil guys? Why we have this disconnection between the dragons aspects and the elemental dragons? Why this fight begins? If you could talk, or if this is something you are going to talk in the future, the primal, the aspects try to change the incarnates and they fight back, or it was the other way around?
Yeah, totally. There's a few questions in there, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So, when it comes to the incarnates, as we saw in the Legacy series leading up to Dragonflight, the dragons defeated Galakrond, and then after that, the Titans blessed the dragons to become the dragon aspects and the flights that we know today. But, as you mentioned, as we learn, the incarnates and other dragons, there were other dragons as well who didn't want the gift of the Titans, and they were suspicious of them. So actually, it was Razagath, as we saw, who attacked Neltharion once she realized, he had created this Drakthir army to stand against the incarnates. And when it comes to the incarnates, especially if you ask them, what their motivations, if they're evil or not, I think it depends on their point of view, and it's often based on the goals and the motivations there, right? So ultimately, the incarnates are opposed to the dragon aspects, and by extension, then the Titans. And that's definitely a big part of what, we're going to see unfold as Dragonflight continues, right? Like we said, we saw Razagath strike that first blow, but there's a lot of other things that might have happened that we're gonna see unfold as Dragonflight progresses.
Okay. Now about the upgrade system, because now you are having a new system to upgrade our gear. Could you explain a little more about the system and why not use a simple system to make the upgrade? Because right now we are going to have three currency, right, to make the upgrade. Why not have a simple systems like the Valor from the past?
Right, yeah. Yeah, so I would say there's actually two things when we were talking about this upgrade system that we were adding in Embers on Neltharion. The first one is, when we took a step back, like you mentioned, we have things like Valor, but we also had other ways to upgrade items as well. We had these primal storms that you could engage in, and you would get a different currency from that. And you had to earn items and had a different vendor. And we really had multiple disparate systems, which, to your point, I think were relatively simple. But the fact that there were like multiple systems that I had to understand and know where to go and know how to use really felt like that was more of a multiplicative element of complexity. So we wanted to kind of create the like grand unified theory of, PvE upgrades in World of Warcraft. Um, and when I think about this new upgrade system in Embers of Neltharion, the way I have been kind of keeping it straight in my head is there's basically two currencies. There's flight stones, which are the currency that you'll get a lot of. It's almost more equivalent to like experience, right? Like you do some instances, you do some world quests, you're going to get some flight stones. So you're going to have a lot more of that currency. You'll be spending that a lot more. And then there's the second currency, which are Shadow Flame crests. And granted, there are multiple, many tiers of Shadow Flame crests. I kind of think of that as, a separate currency all to itself. And the differences there are really just to kind of express almost like a high watermark of the level of difficulty of content that you're completing. So let's say, the example I like to use is, I'm doing Heroic Avarice, the new raid. I've got a pair of shoulders that I really like. I can take my flight stones and upgrade those shoulders. And then I can take, if I killed a heroic boss and maybe I got a heroic Shadow Flame crest, I can then apply the Shadow Flame crest to those shoulders to increase their potential. And one of the things that we think is, a big win and a big problem we were trying to solve was this idea of, you mentioned Valor, this problem of almost having like a buyer's remorse when you use that currency, right? Like if you're anything like me, when I get Valor, I basically would like hoard it. Like I was really afraid to spend my Valor because I was worried that like, well, if I upgrade this item, what if the higher item level one drops in my next run, or I get that in my Great Vault and I wasted that currency? That's kind of precious, especially early in the season. So with this new system, we're really looking to kind of change that. And maybe now in Embers on Neltharion, when I upgrade those shoulders, not only am I upgrading this specific item I'm wearing, but you're kind of upgrading that item slot. Like you're increasing the potential of that item slot, which means hopefully players are more willing to experiment and engage with the system. So while there might be more things to learn, it's all unified. And also we're hoping that people are more willing to, upgrade their items and engage in the system because there's a lot of like kind of built-in things that make it more friendly than some of our previous systems.
Okay. And about the telegraphs, I'm not so sure how you how the name you use for the visual notification of the attacks for the boss for the
Yeah, telegraph is a
yeah.
good word, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, about the telegraphs, right now we have some problems with telegraphs because sometimes we are fighting water elemental that's blue or white at white floor, and the telegraph is white, and we could
It's
not
also white, yeah.
yeah, we could not see what's going on, where we could stand. There are plans to change that to make something more unification, like the enemy attacks you are going to be red or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, certainly there are a lot of different ways to solve that problem. First of all, we absolutely agree that that is a problem that happens. Um, I think, one of the ways, I'll speak to a couple things that we've done here. One of the ways is that we're trying to communicate with our multiple awesome art teams very early and get a good idea of like, okay, what is the color palette? Let's say our dungeon art team is going to use for this room, right? Like, hey, dungeon art, are you making a white floor? You are. Okay, cool. Hey, character art, what color is the boss going to be in this room? Because we want the boss to have contrast so that they stand out in the environment that they're in. And then additionally, hey, let's the VFX team, what's the color palette for the school of magic that this creature is going to use? And let's make sure that there's contrasting colors of magic that they're using versus the floor. So if we know, moving forward, hey, this is going to be a lightning boss, it's going to have a lot of blue colors, then we try, especially with our newer content, to avoid using blue colors on the floor. You know, it's so funny. Internally, we call this like the red on red problem, right? Because like back in Emerald Nightmare, that was a big thing. It was like, oh, the Nightmare stuff is red, the VFX are red. Like, oh my goodness. So we definitely are quite aware of that problem. So we're trying to solve it early on with just more communication and collaboration with our art teams. But then additionally, I think one of the areas where we've seen this kind of pop up more recently is actually in a lot of our Mythic Plus dungeons, because, we're excited to have these awesome legacy dungeons that we're using in Mythic Plus. So like in season 1, an area that we saw this and got a lot of feedback on was actually in Court of Stars, right? Because that's a dungeon from Legion. So, in Court of Stars, there was a lot of like almost blue on blue, where the floor was blue and the spell effects are blue and the creatures are blue, and it was really hard to tell what was going on. So we actually made a lot of changes, during that season 1 life cycle to make those visuals have more contrast so that they're easier to see. And moving forward into, let's say, not Throne of the Four Winds. What's the one that I'm thinking of? Vortex Pinnacle. That's what I'm thinking of. Vortex Pinnacle, which is a dungeon from Cataclysm that's going to be in season 2. Our designers spent a lot of time looking at, that environment is very white and bright. So let's make sure that we're adjusting the the spell effects on the creatures to have contrast there. So that's another thing that, we feel like we have been taking a lot of effort to look at some of those legacy Mythic Plus dungeons and make sure that their telegraphs are readable. And then to your point about like, could we just make them all red? Certainly that's an option. We've talked about that, right? Like we've all seen other games where it's like, hey, no matter what the creature is doing, it's a red circle. Like it's just very clear. There's a red circle. Don't stand in it. But in World of Warcraft, we really try to make those telegraphs and the aesthetics of the boss feel like it's cohesive with the world. So if I'm fighting, a air elemental, we wanted to do attacks and abilities that feel thematic to that creature. So I definitely think that there's more we could do, especially on maybe like a game-wide level where there's some interesting new technology we could develop to make the borders maybe more clear. I know sometimes those little we call them swirlies, the little swirlies, sometimes
Yes.
the edges get pretty unclear, especially when you scale those spell effects up too much. That edge starts to become really sketchy, and I've definitely seen the Reddit threads of people being like, I call lies. There's no way that thing was supposed to kill me. Look where my character is. Look where the swirly is. So there's definitely things we know that we could do better, but potentially on a more programmatic level, where those edges could be more clear.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, that was a long answer. I
No,
apologize.
no, that's fine. That's great. Mas, galera, antes de continuar, eu queria falar com vocês sobre um parceiro aqui do Codex, que é o NoPing. O NoPing é um programa que trabalha para deixar os seus jogos online muito melhores, muito mais rápidos, diminuindo a latência, o ping dos seus MMOs, de 10 a 50 GMS. Como é que ele faz isso? A gente aqui no Brasil está muito longe onde ficam os servidores dos MMOs dos jogos online, que ficam normalmente na Europa e nos Estados Unidos. E o NoPing, ele cria um atalho, uma rota direta da sua casa para o servidor do jogo. Com isso, ele vai diminuir a sua latência, vai acabar com a perda de pacote e acabar com o desconnect. E além disso, ele tem uma nova tecnologia que também aumenta o seu FPS exclusivo do NoPing. E você acha que não funciona? Não precisa acreditar em mim, porque você pode testar o NoPing de graça, sem pagar nada, por 7 dias, e se gostar, você ainda tem 30% de desconto. E esse desconto ele vale para o plano anual, que já tem um desconto. Então, se você contratar o plano anual, você vai ter o desconto do plano anual, mais o meu 30%. O que você vai ter que fazer? Aqui embaixo vai ter um link, você vai clicar nesse link, baixar o programa, criar a sua conta e na hora que você for comprar, escolhe o plano e coloca o cupom LORDMONS. Só isso, galera. Clica no link, baixa o programa, faz os cadastros e usa o cupom LORDMONS. E além de tudo isso, sempre que você usa, você me ajuda aqui no canal. Então, galera, clica no link, baixa o programa, faz o cadastro e usa o cupom LORDMONS. Muito obrigado para todo mundo que está usando e muito obrigado para todo mundo usar. E agora vamos continuar a ver o vídeo aqui do canal. And about raids, because right now we have some big, every time we have some big raids with a lot of bosses. But in the past we have smaller raids with less bosses, sometimes just one boss, less trash mobs. There are plans to make smaller raids for Dragonflight or for the future, and at the same time, there are some people that think that right now the players they spend too much time raiding, not fight boss, but walking. But not too much buffer right now, but walking when they wiped from the start to the boss. They spend much more time not fighting the bosses, doing other things. Do you think that's a problem, or that's the design of the raid for World of Warcraft?
1 second, I'm kind of thinking about the questions there. So I guess
Yeah,
there's
that's
two
true.
questions
Yes,
there.
true.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
two questions there. Sorry. So I'll start with the first one of
Yeah.
the smaller raid. Yeah, I think the last time we had one of those kind of small raids was in Battle for Azeroth.
BFA.
Yeah, I think those are cool. Often when we do those, it's kind of like the fun side plots. Like we use those to really explore some of the lore and characters that maybe are starting to take, the limelight. I think with Dragonflight, something that is on the horizon, we have our roadmap that I think kind of fills the same role for us in terms of like an opportunity to create a really epic piece of content that also explores a really fun story is with our mega dungeons. We have a mega dungeon coming up on the horizon that I think personally I am extremely excited about. I think it's going to surprise some people. But I think that's the place where we've looked to provide those opportunities for players to see, what feels almost like a mini raid. Like we call them mini dungeons. Another word you could use is like mini raid. they're because they're much larger and more epic, and there's usually a big story tie-in with these mega dungeons as well. So that's really been the space that we've been exploring lately. Not to say we wouldn't make those smaller, almost like a Nixia Lair style raids again, but usually there would have to be an opportunity where that makes sense. And then for the second part of your question, which I believe was about, just how much time we spend not fighting bosses, especially in our raids.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one is fun. So, something that to me makes World of Warcraft feel really unique is we really want to make our raids feel like real places. We want it to feel, when you walk into, this is an old example, like in Shadowlands, when you walk into Castle Nathria, this should feel like a real space. Like people lived here, like things were happening before we walked in the door. The space doesn't exist just for us to come in and, collect loot. It should be something that makes the world feel more alive. And a big part of achieving that goal is filling the spaces with other creatures, other things, having space like big long hallways or rooms that aren't for bosses. They're just for telling the story of whatever might be coming up in the narrative. And like with, for instance, with Embers of Neltharion, we feel like the space we're building with Aberrus, the Shadowed Crucible, which is our new raid, there's a lot of legacy to this space, right? Like this is the laboratory of Neltharion, right? Like this is the blueprint for raids like Blackwing Descent, Blackwing Lair, where we've seen Nefarian in the past kind of doing experiments almost inspired by his father. We're going to Aberrus. This is the place where he would have seen those things growing up and kind of took inspiration from. So there's so many cool stories to tell within this raid space that make it feel like the true laboratory of this kind of like evil genius of Neltharion before he became Deathwing. And this is also the place where he kind of descended into madness and started to hear those whispers of the old gods. So filling the raid with, you know, spaces that can tell that story is really important to what the identity of a raid in World of Warcraft is. So I think that really speaks to why we do those things. And then the second part of the answer, which your community or you, please don't torch me, but I feel strongly, is just pacing, right? Like World of Warcraft is a very social experience. We're all there together. We're all there to experience this as a group and also have fun together. And having, you know, those kind of peaks and valleys where you know, there's the raid boss, which everyone is like, all right, we're focusing, we're on the raid boss, but having the pacing change where, you know, we're clearing some monsters leading up to the room, or we just wiped, and let's run back, which maybe might take a minute, to get back to the raid boss, but that gives us an opportunity to take a beat, pause, and say like, hey, why did we wipe? Or oh, sorry, my dog is barking. I got to go take care of that, right? Like just that pacing and those peaks and valleys we feel is also really important to just the social experience that is a raid in World of Warcraft.
Okay. And about PvP, right now we have solo mix.
Mhm.
That there's an opportunity for many players to play to be on PvP, but there are some problems with the wait times that are too long, and there are plans to make improvements for solo mix, for the wait times, for the problems with people just dropping after one loss,
Mhm.
and any
Yes.
other improvement.
Mhm.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we've definitely made a lot of changes all the way through, or sorry, in season 1 of Dragonflight, to kind of discourage people from dropping out of the games. You know, we made it so that you're getting the rating changes per round instead of at the end, so that if you leave, you take a larger rating hit. You know, if you leave in the middle versus waiting until the end. So we've definitely made some changes there. And in terms of the queue times, yeah, that's a tough one. You know, we uh, you know, wish we could find ways, or rather, we are talking about ways to kind of incentivize more healers to queue, because ultimately that's what we're waiting on,
Yeah.
right? Like, hey, healers, can you get in the queue? So we've done things like, you know, healers get more conquest for queuing up, but that's not actually very clear. Like, we don't communicate that well in the UI. So we definitely are looking for ways to, like, you know, essentially provide more carrots for people to queue, similar to like what we have with LFD, you know, like when there's a role that you might need to queue dungeons, there's sometimes that like golden border and you get a cool box of goodies. Things like that are things that we've talked about adding for Solo Shuffle to better incentivize people to join. We've also talked about weirder ideas there, like maybe we pop the queue, but it's only a 2v2 with all DPS. Like there's other options that we've discussed and explored, but haven't really tried out yet. But yeah, definitely something that is on our radar that we're discussing.
Oh, okay. And Mythic Plus, uh, you right now you're using the system for with 8 dungeons, 4 from Dragonflight and 4 from old expansion.
Mhm.
Uh, do you like the way it's working right now? And for the future, it's going to be the same. It's going to be for season 3. It's going to be 4 Dragonflight dungeons, 4 dungeons from the past. We are going to see the same dungeons like the dungeons we see for season 1. They could come back, or you are planning to bring in new dungeons from maybe Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So far, yeah. I mean, we really are excited about Embers of Neltharion season 2 being an entirely new pool of dungeons, right? Like, this is the first time we've ever seen that in a later season of an expansion. Like, ever since Mythic Plus has come out, it's always been the case of we have this dungeon pool. Sometimes we'll add to it, but we've never had an entirely new dungeon pool. So we're really excited to see how this plays out. And I think that'll also inform future us, of what decisions we might want to do there, right? Like having that entirely fresh new pool. seems like it's going to be something that's really exciting and the community hopefully really enjoys. But ultimately, feedback is something that we really take into consideration. So what does that dungeon pool look like going into season 3? Will definitely be influenced by, you know, the outcome of season 2 and how players receive how that went.
About Mythic 2, there are a lot of discussion too about the affects, maybe to bring more positive affects, not just the negative ones. How is your stance? How do you see to bring it more affects that give buffs or increase haste, damage for the players, and not just the ones that make the punishment if they make something bad? To bring something like, if you do this affix at the right time, you are going to get more DPS, like some affix you use in the past, but to bring more of this positive affix for Mythic Plus.
Yeah, let's see. There's quite a bit of nuance to that
Yeah.
question. So, you know, ultimately affixes are there to add a challenge, right? And when we talk about adding affixes that are providing you with a buff, we run the risk of saying, when I go from Mythic 6 to Mythic 7, it actually gets easier because now there's this buff here that's helping me out. So that kind of is one problem that we've discussed. But also, one of the major goals of our Mythic season 2 of Mythic Plus is to actually, you know, increase the what's the word I'm looking for here, right? Like to make the dungeon itself, like to make the trash monsters and the spells they're casting more of the focus and really, you know, kind of depower affixes. And when it comes to affixes that add like a buff, for that to feel impactful, it really has to be pretty transformative. The example I've used recently is, you know, maybe take a look at something like Prideful in season 1 of Shadowlands. Sorry, I was drawing a blank there for a second. Where, you know, it would spawn this big creature, and when you kill it, you get this really big buff for a good duration. And that felt really good. It felt really impactful. But at a certain point, it started to feel like you were playing the affix rather than playing the dungeon. Like it was so transformative where it would change your routing substantially in some dungeons so that you could time when this buff turns on. And really, our focus for season 2 of Mythic Plus is to put more of a emphasis on the actual dungeon itself. So that those goals are kind of misaligned in that sense. But with that said, you know, we kind of um, recognize that there is definitely that audience that just loves Mythic Plus. You know, they're basically playing like World of Warcraft, Mythic Plus, the game, right? Like it's the main reason they play Mythic Plus. And for that audience, this is something that we think there is potentially some design space for, like, you know, much higher keystones. Because, you know, like one of the major changes, speaking of, you know, not only do we have an entirely new dungeon pool, we've also kind of spread out when the affixes turn on. Um, you know, really our goal going into Dragonflight, you know, when we first launched with Mythic Plus, was to create more of a sense of progression. You know, we increased the difficulty ceiling essentially of where you can get rewarded for doing Mythic Plus. But when we took a step back, we were really, you know, kind of realized like it's not uncommon for people to try Mythic Plus for the first time and for like all of the affixes to be turned on already. So now you're not only are you learning a new dungeon, but there's like in season 1, that's 3 or 4 affixes that are going to be turned on. So that's just a lot. And you never really get that sense of progression of playing the dungeon without, you know, any affixes and then 1 affix and then 2 affixes. So we really wanted to stretch out the progression there. So as we look at our affixes turning on at like 7 and 14, there's a lot of parallels actually with rating, right? Like rating, you have normal, and then you graduate to heroic, and then some people graduate to mythic. You know, we have our level 7 and our level 14, but we do think there's potentially some design space at that upper end, essentially like mythic plus, you know, like, so maybe there's design space in that level 21 and up affix space where we could look to explore some design space like this, where we know, okay, these are people who are really deep into the system. They're really, you know, excited for some of that added complexity and added mastery, where early on we would rather, you know, the larger audience be focusing on just learning the dungeons. Again, really long response. I'm sorry.
Problem. And that right now we have some problems here in Brazil for our servers because we have 5 servers. But to be honest, really honest, we have just one server with people, and we have 4 population realms. There are plans to make more connected realms to see these problems, to solve these problems. Not just for the Brazilian community. I think the Latin American community have some problems, the same problems. Maybe the European community too.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, I can't speak to the specifics of the plans there, but I will say that, you know, generally we're constantly looking at lowering barriers and addressing factors that make, you know, playing on a low pop realm or low pop faction even, you know, unpleasant. Um, so, you know, we're constantly looking at things like, I think, you know, the commodities auction house, you know, we just changed quite a bit to no longer be server wide. So there's always things that we're looking at addressing to try to resolve some of those problems that might occur if you're on a low pop server. Um, and yeah, we definitely periodically evaluate realm health for connections. But like I said, I'm not sure when, you know, the server team is looking to do their next evaluation there.
So okay. And can you talk anything about hardcore classic? Because right now I'm playing the hardcore classic, and it's very popular with the audio, with Twitch streamers to play the hardcore servers.
I personally am here to talk about Embers on Eltharion, so I don't have
Yeah.
too many specifics there. I do think it's really cool though. Like I love when the community, you know, kind of creates these, frankly, very community driven, you know, like audiences and content. And they see something that's really, really exciting, and they all kind of create that like organic, almost like grassroots um, scenes. So, you know, I know the classic team is watching that closely. I don't have any, you know, announcements or anything to add other than like it is really cool. I
Okay.
definitely have watched that
Yeah.
myself.
I have to make this question, or they're going to fight me when I make the stream.
All good.
And there are plans for. Sorry, my cat's over here. Oh, okay. So about heritage armors, can you talk about there are plans to make new ones and about heritage weapons too? Because we have some for dark iron dwarfs, right? We have some weapons, but not for the other races. There are plans to make more in the future.
Um, Yeah, so, you know, most recently that with heritage armor, we've added the orc and the human heritage armors, as well as like some really cool quest lines that play
Yes.
into that. You know, we definitely love heritage armor. You know, we do want to continue that forward and bring out those armor types that are so evocative of like the core fantasy of the races. So we definitely want to continue that. You know, I can't announce which ones or when we'll do it next. And then the weapons, you know, weapons are not something that we think of as a package with heritage armor. Generally, the armor comes out with itself, and then when it comes to weapons, that's something that we would treat separate from heritage armor, and you know only really focus on doing those when they make sense.
Okay. And for the last question, I have to ask about housing. That's something that's the my viewers always ask about. How's the team? They have talks about housing. How do you see housing in World of Warcraft? How it's going to, if they are going to be in the future, how it's going to work? It's a long project for many expansion.
Nothing to announce.
Yeah.
Definitely, you know, that's not something that we've talked about Certainly the team thinks, you know, there's opportunity there. Like people like yourself often bring up like, hey, so would you ever bring housing to World of Warcraft? So we definitely hear that suggestion often and do think it's a cool idea. It's just a matter of, you know, when would we do that? And like you said, it's such a big undertaking. Like it's a pretty massive change to a lot of things and how we would have to kind of lay out our cities, and it's a big change to the reward structure. So it's just a really big undertaking, and we do think it's a cool idea. It's just a matter of when would be the right time to do it.
É isso, galera. Espero que vocês tenham gostado. Espero que vocês tenham aproveitado toda essa entrevista. E para completar, eu quero muito saber a opinião de vocês. O que vocês acharam de tudo que foi falado, de tudo que foi apresentado hoje nessa entrevista? Qual foi a resposta que vocês mais gostaram? O que deixou vocês mais entusiasmados? Se vocês tivessem a chance de perguntar alguma coisa para a Blizzard, o que vocês perguntariam? Escreve aqui embaixo, deixa um comentário, porque a sua opinião é o mais importante aqui no canal. E não se preocupa que depois de eu fazer um vídeo separado, dando a minha opinião, comentando tudo que ele disse, tudo que ele falou aqui para vocês. And thank you very much, guys, for anyone that's watching this video, liking this video, and I hope you enjoy. I hope you know a little more about World of Warcraft. And if you like this video, leave a like below. And that's it. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado, galera. CODEX. Muito obrigado por assistir.